We begin this morning with new nationwide fallout after an ICE officer shot and killed a Minnesota mother. Protesters took to the streets yesterday in several major cities across the country, including Boston, New York, and Minneapolis, with more demonstrations expected this afternoon. Listen to what some of the protesters had to say.
What we're looking for is to remove the ICE agents that are not following the law. They have not been trained. They are not equipped. They're not like our police officers or our armed forces.
ICE is conducting a reign of terror in American cities that is violence against hard-working immigrants and now just American citizens trying to defend people in their community. It's a reign of terror. It's got to stop.
Meanwhile, the Trump administration continues to push its own narrative, doubling down on its argument that the ICE officer who killed Renee Good was acting in self-defense. Minnesota officials who've been cut off from the FBI from key evidence in that case reject that narrative. Even as those officials push back, the administration is also working hard to villainize the shooting victim. Case in point, yesterday on X, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt posted, quote, "This woman was not an innocent mother dropping her kid off at school. She was a leftist insurrectionist who was purposefully and illegally obstructing law enforcement operations." And she later shared a video released by the Department of Homeland Security that appeared to show Good's car partially blocking traffic in the moments leading up to the shooting. Joining us now, Eugene Robinson, MS Now political analyst and Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist, and Christopher O'Leary, former FBI special agent and senior counterterrorism official. He is also an MS Now national security and intelligence analyst. Fellas, thank you for joining us at the table so early this morning. Christopher, I want to start with you. When we are looking at the series of extraordinary events that happened over the last few days, can you spell out the biggest red flags for you that have happened along the way?
Well, I think there's a couple of things that, one of which has been a trend that's been building is the militarization of DHS and the culture of using force as a standard in their enforcement operations, which is a vast departure from the way they've conducted themselves over the years. And I have many ICE and Border Patrol agents that I've worked closely with, and they're mortified at what they're seeing. And it's somewhat like the Stanford, prison guard experiment gone wrong at scale, that this has been normalized. And I think it's important to note that the overwhelming majority of ICE operations and DHS immigration operations are done on civil warrants, administrative warrants. It's supposed to limit the amount of force that's used. They don't have the authority to forcibly enter a place. They don't have probable cause to arrest U.S. citizens who may be in the vicinity. So the question is, with this incident, what was the victim doing? What was this woman doing that they believed was so egregious that they needed to take these furtive steps to not only surround her car, but then use deadly force? And were they perceiving her as the enemy, them, instead of looking at her as a fellow citizen and trying to use the minimum amount of force necessary? If she was blocking the road, again, having been in enforcement operations across this country and around the world, it's alarming to me to see this escalate that quickly. And I understand that the officer involved had been dragged by a car before, so I don't want to be overly critical. You have to let the investigation play out. And if the investigation was allowed to play out in normal times, I would have every confidence that the agents of the FBI Minneapolis field office, where I served for a number of years, would do dragnet, just the facts. They would actually have a good investigation, and they'd present it to the local prosecutor for a review, and they'd come up with a determination.
I take it you are not confident that the FBI is going to
when under the leadership, and I say that with like serious air quotes, of Kash Patel, and then with DOJ and the White House already trying to influence this investigation, we're in the era of alternative facts, and it erodes the trust and confidence in institutions across the U.S. government and certainly in the FBI.
Eugene first, Eugene. I'll be second, Eugene. One of the things that has been, I think, most disturbing is the American president, vice president, their team, the people that work for them, not just going out front and trying to create this narrative, but calling this woman names as if, even if she were those things, and there's no evidence that she was, even if she was deranged leftist or a leftist extremist, those are not crimes in which in this country you are put to death. Right. And so, when you are looking at the way that they're talking about this woman who is dead, and there's an investigation, maybe a good one that might come out of this, so we might know more who this woman is. But what do you think they're actually trying to do here?
It's propaganda. It's they're telling lies toward a political end, and I think they fear that the killing of a U.S. citizen in this manner on video, as everybody saw, would continue to shift public opinion against what ICE is doing. And so what was striking to me, and frankly, to me, reprehensible, I'm an opinion guy, I could just say flat out, utterly reprehensible, was the way J.D. Vance, for example, came out immediately and not just blamed the victim, but insisted on this narrative of Renee Good essentially trying to kill this officer, and this officer having to act in self-defense. And, regardless of what the video actually shows, when they released the cell phone, the officer's video yesterday, again, the video shows her turning the wheel sharply to the right in an obvious attempt to just get out of the way, yet the White House is maintaining that it shows something else. And you know what?
That's some kind of intent.
Exactly. Yeah. And it made me think of you guys remember the Springfield, Ohio cats and dogs?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Right. And so, it was being pushed hard by J.D. Vance and by President or then candidate Trump, it was totally debunked, including by me. I went to Springfield. I talked to the mayor. It's not happening. And when confronted with the facts, J.D. Vance stuck with the story. And what he said was, if I have to create stories so that the American media actually pays attention to the suffering of the American people, then that's what I'm going to do. That's what he's doing.
Yes.
He's creating a story.
Right.
And he's pushing the story in a way that's, you would expect from Soviet Russia. You wouldn't expect from the United States.
Or a poster on the internet.
You know what this reminds me of? The administration's effort to get out ahead of everything is the Mueller report, and how Bill Barr came out and said, here's what the report says. And then the report was released 3 days later and was completely different.
It's not what Bill Barr said.
It's not what Bill Barr said, but the narrative had been set.
Exactly.
And, Christopher, the thing that has, so many things about this have enraged me, but two things in particular. The cell phone video of the shooter, of the ICE officer. How is it possible that he could have a cell phone in one hand and a gun in the other? And how is that even procedure? But more importantly, why is the administration, or how did that video get out to the public? How is it that the administration is releasing other videos to push their narrative when they're also investigating this crime? I know that's a legal term, but investigating this. How are the American people supposed to trust at all what comes out of this administration now, and what could come out of the investigation if there is a report that comes out? Because it seems to me they don't care. There's going to be no report, as would happen in a normal Justice Department.
I think he highlighted it's propaganda. I mean, it's setting the narrative. and it's not the facts of the investigation, which is problematic. But what the investigator should be looking at, and what I would be looking at, is did these officers conduct themselves reasonably, which is kind of the foundation for U.S. law.
Reasonable to whom?
Objectively reasonable. So for an average citizen giving this set of facts, would that person perceive this as an objective, reasonable decision? So what led them to that car? And I'm looking at the video. This is civil disobedience. This is not domestic terrorism. Somebody who's studied and worked counterterrorism operations for decades, I can tell you authoritatively, this is not domestic terrorism. And it's certainly not the days of rage from the late 60s and 70s. So what brought them to that car? They didn't like being filmed. And then what brought them to surround the car and use deadly force
and yell at the woman
and also violate ICE policy? The way they approached the car was outside of policy. Yeah. Shooting at a fleeing vehicle was outside of ICE policy. So at the very least, there should be administrative actions within DHS, but also blocking out the state and local investigators is problematic for a variety of reasons, but also practically. The FBI and other federal agencies are relatively small. They do it through partnerships. They affect their operations through partnerships. Since the foundation of the FBI in 1908, you build partnerships and task forces.